Did you know that the Colosseum, one of the greatest symbols of the Roman Empire, hides fascinating secrets and stories far beyond its famous gladiator fights? Although it is admired for its grandeur and endurance, few know the epic journey that this monument has undergone over the centuries. From an impressive amphitheater to an arena for bloody battles, to a site transformed into a medieval fortress, and even a center of Christian worship. And what about the stones of the Colosseum, which traveled all over Rome to build churches and palaces? The history of the Colosseum is marked by legends, destruction, and rebirth, and you will discover how it survived the fall of the empire and the violence of time. Get ready to see the Colosseum in a way you never imagined, and discover how it became the historical icon that we know today. The Colosseum. History and ruins. The Colosseum is, without a doubt, one of the largest and most impressive monuments in the history of humanity. With its imposing height of almost 50 meters and a circumference of over 55 kilometers, it is not difficult to understand why it impresses everyone who sees it. Furthermore, the Colosseum weighs around 1.5 million tons, an incredible amount of mass that demonstrates the grandeur of Roman engineering. But what many do not know is that, although it is a marvel of engineering, it could have been even larger and more majestic had it not been partially destroyed over the centuries. When looking at the outer wall of the Colosseum, we can see that it is only half complete, which is a testament to the countless destructions that the monument suffered. What is perhaps even more surprising is that this half Colosseum is a site that dates back to the 14th century. From then on, the Colosseum began to lose its original shape, with the removal of precious stones and materials which were used in other buildings around the city. But what many do not know is that this transformation of the Colosseum has a fascinating history, which goes beyond gladiatorial combats. A history marked by emperors who lost their fortunes, Christian martyrs who found shelter in its ruins, pilgrims who visited the site, and even popes who used it as a source of income. In addition, the Colosseum was marked by devastating earthquakes that contributed to its decline. During the Middle Ages and the modern age, the Colosseum underwent a radical transformation, becoming a symbol of something completely different from what it originally was. But before we explore how the Colosseum was changed over the centuries, it is important to understand the magnitude of its construction and the impact it had on ancient Rome. The construction of the Colosseum, which was initially known as the amphitheater of the Colossus, began construction in 72 AD under the reign of Emperor Vespasian. The decision to build the Colosseum was a great demonstration of power and grandeur, something that the Roman Empire was proud to display. To finance this monumental project, Emperor Vespasian used the spoils of the Jewish-Roman War, a bloody military campaign in which, together with his son Titus, he defeated the Jewish revolt in Judea. During this campaign, Vespasian and Titus destroyed the famous Temple of Jerusalem, and the resources obtained from this victory were used to erect one of the greatest buildings of antiquity. After Vespasian's death, his son Titus continued the work, bringing the construction to completion. In turn, Emperor Domitian, Titus's brother, made the final modifications to the building, completing what would become the Colosseum in its almost definitive form. Since these three emperors belonged to the Flavian dynasty, the amphitheater ended up being named the Flavian Amphitheater in their honor. However, at the time of its construction, it was simply known as the amphitheater, a structure designed to house grand spectacles and provide a unique experience for the Roman public. The word amphitheater has an interesting origin. It comes from two theaters, as its circular structure differs from traditional theaters which were semicircular. This allowed the audience to be closer to the action, making the experience much more intense. But why then do we know it as the Colosseum and not the amphitheater? The name Colosseum has an interesting explanation. It derives from a huge statue called the Colossus of Nero, which stood nearby the monument. This statue, which represented Emperor Nero himself, was later transformed into a representation of the sun god, and the name Colosseum in Latin referred not only to the colossal size of the building, but also to the gigantic statue that accompanied it. This connection between the Colosseum and the statue of Nero highlights Rome's desire to associate its monument with the power and grandeur of the emperors who founded it, creating a symbiosis between the building and the symbol of maximum authority. The construction of the Colosseum was not only an engineering achievement, but also an expression of political propaganda, which aimed to reinforce the status of the Roman Empire in the eyes of the world. Over the centuries, the Colosseum became an immortal symbol of Rome, with its imposing structure withstanding the test of time, even when its stones began to be removed to make way for new projects. The use of the Colosseum. The Colosseum is world famous for being the stage for gladiatorial spectacles, exotic animal hunts, and public executions. However, what happened inside it went far beyond that, becoming the center of a series of grand events that enchanted and impressed the Roman population. In addition to the famous gladiatorial fights, the Colosseum was also the setting for theatrical performances, both tragedies and comedies, which entertained the Romans with dramatic and comical stories. Other types of entertainment, such as fights between wild animals and prisoners, were also part of the program, with the aim of pleasing a population eager for strong emotions. There are even reports that, on some occasions, simulated naval battles were held inside the arena, an event that, although fascinating, remains controversial among historians, who question the viability of such battles in an enclosed space. With an impressive capacity for more than 50,000 people, the Colosseum was a veritable entertainment machine, where spectators were organized according to their social status. The seats closest to the arena were reserved for the most powerful, the emperor, the senators, and the elite of Rome. Meanwhile, the plebs, the lowest class of Roman society, were further away from the action, sitting in higher and less privileged sections. This system of hierarchy in the seating reflected the rigid social structure of ancient Rome, where the physical distances between social classes were also reflected in their access to the most exciting and bloody events. However, as the centuries passed, the shows at the Colosseum began to decrease in frequency and complexity. The reason for this was multifaceted. One of the main factors was the growth of Christianity, which preached peace and mercy, condemning the violence of combat. There is a well-known story about a Christian monk who, in a courageous gesture, tried to interrupt a gladiator fight. The audience, furious at the interruption, stoned the monk, an episode that would have been the last straw for Emperor Honorius, already a Christian, to officially ban gladiator fights. However, this Christianization of the Roman Empire was not the only reason for the end of the combats. The empire, which was already experiencing difficult times of instability and economic crisis, no longer had the resources to maintain these expensive and grand events. The last recorded gladiator fight at the Colosseum took place around 430 AD, more than a century after Emperor Constantine converted to Christianity, and after the decline of Rome's military and political strength. The decline of the Colosseum. As the Roman Empire began to face its collapse, the Colosseum also entered a period of decline. Maintaining a monument of this magnitude was expensive and required resources that Rome no longer had. The Colosseum, once a symbol of power and grandeur, gradually fell into disrepair, reflecting the decline of the city of Rome itself. From the 3rd century onwards, the Colosseum suffered structural damage from fires and earthquakes. The fire of 217 AD was particularly devastating and took about 5 years to restore. However, the damage did not stop there. Further earthquakes in 443 and 508 AD continued to compromise the structure of the monument, which gradually lost its imposing appearance. As Rome faced political, economic, and military crises, the Colosseum fell into neglect, abandonment, and eventually was used as a quarry. The stones of the Colosseum were removed for the construction and renovation of houses, city walls, and other public works, further contributing to its destruction. The last gladiator fight in the Colosseum took place in 430 AD, and the last major recorded spectacle, a hunt, took place in 523 AD. As its original function declined, the Colosseum became a ruined monument, and the Roman population, increasingly alienated from its former symbols of power, began to use it in a more pragmatic and utilitarian way. The Middle Ages and the Modern Age. During the Middle Ages, the Colosseum underwent an even more surprising transformation. The structure, now in ruins, was reconfigured in unusual ways. Homes, businesses, and blacksmiths' workshops began to be built inside the Colosseum itself, reusing the original stones and materials of the ancient amphitheater. This change in use reflects the adaptation of medieval society, which made the most of what was available, without any concern for the preservation of the historical heritage. The situation reached such a point that, in the 11th century, the powerful Frangipani family decided to transform the Colosseum into a fortress, with walls and towers to defend the city. However, this fortress was soon taken over by the Annibaldi family, and the structure ended up being sold to the Catholic Order of Saint Salvador. The Colosseum was so transformed during this period that no one remembered that the great gladiatorial fights had taken place there. For centuries, the monument was seen only as a medieval fortress, and in some medieval legends, it was even considered a palace of Emperor Vespasian, or, even more curiously, a temple dedicated to the sun god. These legends show how, over time, the Colosseum lost its original meaning, transforming itself into something very different from what it had been in its heyday. The destruction and recovery of the Colosseum. Over the centuries, the Colosseum faced a series of challenges that contributed to its gradual destruction. One of the main reasons for this process was the removal of the stones from the monument to build new buildings, a common practice during the Middle Ages and the Renaissance. In 1452, Pope Nicholas V authorized the removal of 2,522 loads of stones from the Colosseum, which were destined for the construction of the imposing St. Peter's Basilica in Rome. Although this decision was motivated by the need for materials for religious works, it represented one of many blows that the Colosseum would suffer over the centuries. The greatest tragedy for the structure occurred in 1342, when a strong earthquake caused the destruction of much of the southern section of the Colosseum, marking the beginning of an irreparable loss for the monument. Although natural events caused significant damage, the most devastating was the intentional plundering of the stones to build other buildings. In the year 1349, half of the Colosseum collapsed, for good, leaving what remained of the grand amphitheater even more dilapidated. From that moment on, the Colosseum, once a symbol of power and grandeur, became a mere shadow of its former self. The material removed from the construction was reused in several works, such as the Basilica of St. John Lateran and the Palazzo Barberini, important Renaissance buildings that used the stones of the Colosseum to build their majestic structures. Preservation and the role of the popes. However, all was not lost for the Colosseum. Although it had been extensively looted and neglected over the centuries, the monument was also encouraged to be preserved by some popes who recognized its historical and symbolic value. During the Renaissance, when interest in ancient texts and knowledge was revived, the Colosseum began to be seen in a new light. Its connection with Christian martyrs, many of whom, according to tradition, had been martyred there, was one of the main reasons for this new appreciation. From the 10th century onwards, this association with the martyrs began to inspire a movement to preserve the Colosseum as a sacred site, away from the destruction that had marked it. In 1750, Pope Benedict XIV made a major intervention to consolidate this preservation. He ordered an inscription to be installed on the Colosseum, officially transforming it from a pagan amphitheater into a place of Christian worship. This change in perception and use of the monument helped ensure that, despite its decline, the Colosseum was seen as a symbol of faith and resistance, something more than just an ancient building. Rather than being seen simply as a vestige of a fallen empire, it began to be recognized as a sacred site that was part of the religious identity of Rome and Christianity. The 19th century and the recovering of history. The 19th century brought a new phase of care for the Colosseum, but also a historical irony. During this period, the Italian government assumed responsibility for the preservation and restoration of the monument. and several archaeological excavations were carried out with the aim of recovering its original grandeur. However, this effort to rescue the ancient history of the Colosseum ended up causing the loss of many traces of the medieval and modern history of the building. The renovations carried out to restore the building to its original form irreversibly eliminated the traces of the transformations that the Colosseum underwent over the centuries. Thus, while archaeologists sought to restore ancient memory, they also erased a crucial part of the monument's narrative, which was closely linked to the evolution of Rome over time. The history of the Colosseum goes far beyond its foundation in ancient Rome. It carries with it not only the glories of the Roman Empire, but also a rich medieval, modern, and contemporary history, marked by legends, destruction, and reinvention. The Colosseum was transformed into a religious symbol, reused to build new buildings, and eventually preserved as a global icon of historical importance. It continues to this day to be a testament to the resilience and complexity of Rome, which over the centuries has managed to transform a symbol of violence and entertainment into a universal heritage of faith, history, and culture. If you are fascinated by the history of the Colosseum and want to continue exploring the mysteries and secrets of other historical icons, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Activate the bell so you don't miss any news, and leave your comment below with what surprised you most about the Colosseum. Let's continue this journey through time together.